Hi, everyone. I'm Kylee Griswold, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to my brand new podcast. This is the Kylee Cast. And here at the Kylee Cast, we're going to talk about culture. We're going to talk about religion. We're going to talk about politics. We're going to talk about whatever it is that has me fired up on any given week. From marriage to entertainment to health to the broken media. If I care about it, you're going to hear about it every Thursday. So to make sure you never miss a new episode, please be sure to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, or better yet, if you're just listening to the show, go check out the full video version on my personal YouTube channel or at the Federalist channel on Rumble. I would also love to hear from you, so you can email the show at radio@thefederalist.com. We have so much to get to today. First of all, is David French really the guy we want lecturing about toxic masculinity? Also, it's a day ending in Y, so the lying media are lying again. And Hollywood has-been Lily Allen has had so many abortions, she can't even remember how many. All that and more on the Kylee Cast. So in prepping for this show, I was actually gearing up to talk about something totally different, but I just had to pivot when Jordan Peterson decided to release a podcast on toxic masculinity with David French. And I'm no stranger to David French, but if you don't know who he is, he identifies as a lifelong Christian conservative. And he's also a proud never Trumper. So he worked at National Review for a handful of years, and then he hopped over and joined Jonah Goldberg at The Dispatch, which is that never Trump rag. And he sometimes writes for The Atlantic, but now he's a columnist for The New York Times, which pretty much tells you everything you need to know about David French's trajectory and the evolution of his worldview. Oh, and of course, David French is a veteran and an attorney, which is something he mentions every time he opens his mouth. But the reason that French joined Jordan Peterson's podcast was to talk about toxic masculinity, and specifically to discuss a New York Times article that French had written at the end of May about Democrats' $20 million man problem. Which, if you didn't hear about it, that was a piece about Democrats' decision basically to spend a boatload of money to try to lure back all of the men that they scared away into the loving arms of the GOP. And part of this effort, of course, is to try to replicate the Joe Rogan, Theo Vaughn, Andrew Schultz magic that really resonated with men. This magic, of course, is sometimes referred to as the manosphere. It's all those podcast bros. Personally, I'm very excited about this Democrat effort because we all know what it looks like when Democrats try to manufacture a likability or a Trumpiness that their opponents are doing very naturally, very organically. You've all seen this, I'm sure. It's very unnatural. It looks like Democrats cursing at really weird or inappropriate times. Or Elizabeth Warren awkwardly drinking a beer on camera, or Tim Walz dancing around a stage in the gayest way you've ever seen. But anyway, a lot of my thoughts on the podcast actually don't have that much to do with masculinity, because the observations on the podcast were honestly pretty microwaved. Like, if you've listened to Jordan Peterson or anyone else on the center right talk about disaffected men or the crisis of masculinity or deaths of despair or, you know, men lacking purpose, you really don't need to listen to this interview. There's nothing really new there on that front. But there are a few parts about the interview that are definitely worth mentioning. One of which was just an amazing moment that basically it perfectly exposed French's conservatism as the sham that it is. And Peterson, he really teed it up pretty masterfully. He tees up the question with this little smirk on his face, just knowing full well what he's doing. And it's just spectacular. Watch this.
You have written for The Atlantic and for the New York Times.
Why do they allow you to write for them?
Well, you know, they were actually looking for a pro-life person when they were trying to hire a new columnist, actually looking for somebody who was conservative and somebody who had, you know, I'm also a veteran. I don't believe there were any columnists who were veterans. I'm also a lawyer. I don't believe at the time of my hiring that there were any other columnists who were lawyers. I'm a constitutional lawyer. But I was very pleasantly surprised, I'll be honest with you, when I got the job offer. It was definitely not something I was seeking out, but it came to me, and I was very grateful and thankful, and I've had a really good experience there.
Okay. First of all, did you catch that? I want to make sure you know that David French is a veteran and a lawyer, a constitutional lawyer. So I just want to make sure you heard that, a veteran and a lawyer. But seriously, no self-respecting conservative is pleasantly surprised when the corporate media come knocking. Typically they come knocking for a comment request, or they come knocking because they want you to correct an article with more context, which is really just their spin and more lies. But if the media comes knocking to you, David French, with a job offer, if anything, that should be a wake-up call that maybe you're not as conservative as you think you are. The New York Times is nothing more at this point than a propaganda machine. It's nothing more than a public relations arm for the Democrat Party. It's the equivalent of a conservative winning a Pulitzer Prize. No. You know who gets Pulitzer Prizes and cushy gigs at the New York Times, David French? Not conservatives. People who get banned on Twitter for saying boys and girls are different, those are probably conservatives. People who are on the New York Times shortlist for a job offer, probably not conservative. This really isn't that hard for anyone who has spent any amount of time watching the media. Here's another clip, though, that you really should see from this French Peterson interview, because it's really just perfect in its lack of self-awareness. So here French is talking about masculinity, and specifically the way the media talks about men and masculinity. And here's what he had to say.
When we talk about this, when we raise this issue, a lot of people in the commentary and the commentary class and the academic class immediately denigrate a lot of the evidence about the struggles of young men and boys, because they don't see in their milieu, they don't see men struggling, because it's the big, giant number of people who are not in that sort of tip of the spear who are really struggling. And because so many of us live in these bubbles, a lot of people don't see it at all. They don't see it at all. And this is something that I think is endemic in our commentariat, and that is, a lot of our commentariat lives and eats and breathes a very rarefied cultural air, and they don't have any real world sense of the way that people are living their lives and the struggles they're facing outside of that milieu.
If you paid me $1 million, I could not write a more ironic thing for David French to say. This is a guy who fancies himself as somewhat of an expert on masculinity. He talks about it a lot. You can hear it here. That's why he's invited onto this podcast. He writes about it a lot, and he writes about it specifically as it relates to how dangerous and icky and horrible Trump's version of masculinity is. But here he is pontificating about the out-of-touch commentariat, and it's like, look in a mirror. You are the out-of-touch commentariat. David French's entire livelihood, and I mean, I don't want to pick on David French. I mean, I am, but he is a stand-in for so many other people in the media like him. His entire livelihood is based on him sitting behind a screen, clacking out cookie cutter, never Trump, bitter clinger columns for the New York Times about blessings of liberty and toxic masculinity and his vast personal experience as a lawyer and a veteran, with zero sense of what real Americans are feeling and facing. And he can appeal to his son and to his son's friends as if like that gives him some expertise on this. But he is part of this out of touch commentariat, which is why he can say with a straight face that the conservative thing to do was to vote for Kamala Harris. And why he can say with a straight face that sending billions of taxpayer dollars to Ukraine is a moral imperative of struggling Americans. And why COVID vaccine skepticism is actually a spiritual problem. And why Donald Trump is an existential threat to democracy and masculinity. I want to pivot. David Marchese is another guy from the out of touch commentariat at the New York Times, and he has the same problem. And we saw this recently in an interview. He interrogated Andrew Schulz, who is a massively popular stand-up comedian and part of the manosphere I mentioned earlier. And Marchese interrogated Andrew Schulz on his problematic language and beliefs, and basically scolded him for not asking Trump when he interviewed him before the 2024 election. He scolded him for not asking Trump the same stupid left-wing garbage questions that the corporate media ask Trump any chance they get. the thing is, if French and Marchese and the rest of the commentary class, out of touch commentary class, really wants to understand American men, they need to go touch some grass. They need to go talk to a millennial who desperately wants to buy his first home, but doesn't think he ever can because he doesn't make six figures. They need to go talk to the dad who doesn't want his little girl seeing the blessing of liberty grown man in drag gyrating at the local library. Or the flyover families who really struggled to buy groceries thanks to Biden inflation. One more quick thing on masculinity. David French and Jordan Peterson they're right that we shouldn't tell men they're toxic. Obviously, that strategy has been a horribly destructive message for men. It's done a lot of bad things to the culture, which even the New York Times is starting to realize, which is why they recently ran a piece called "Where are all the good men? Come back." It's like this. It's really ruined even relations between the sexes. But men also need to hear more than just "there's nothing wrong with you" or you don't have a problem, because there is something wrong with men. They do have a problem, just like there's something wrong with women, and just like women have a problem. And if you're a Christian, then you know this is part of our entire worldview. And that something wrong with men and the something wrong with women isn't aggression or competitiveness or strength or any other difference between the sexes. It is so much deeper than that. And surprise, surprise, the manosphere actually did a way better job of bringing real clarity to this point. Back to Andrew Schultz on his podcast earlier this summer, he brought on theologian Wes Huff, who offered a really beautiful and far, far better countercultural message that we should be telling both men and women. Take a look.
That there's no such thing as an innocent person, and that I deserve hell. Me, Wes Huff, I deserve hell 100% of the time. That's the wages of sin is death. And that's the language that Paul uses, in that I'm actively working at a job to earn a wage, and that's sin and death, right? But the second part of that line is the gift of God is eternal life through Christ Jesus. So the answer to the question is that I think we are both worse than we realize and have the potential to do much more good than we realize. What the Bible says, particularly in that creation story, right, is that you are created with purpose and meaning and intention, and it is good. You actually bear the image of God, and there's something about that is special. So in one sense, you're more of a piece of shit than you can imagine, but also you're more loved and more capable of amazing things than you can imagine. And that's the dichotomy of Christianity.
Yeah, Jordan Peterson and David French did get a lot right about masculinity in their podcast, all things considered. But Wes Huff just really hit the nail on the head and really homed in on the most important message that we can tell both men and women. And that's that we are all much worse than we realize. We are all pretty toxic. It's a bad word. It's been politicized, but we're all pretty bad. But through the redemption of Christ, we have more potential than we could ever imagine. All right, everybody. Now we're going to do some bad news. And by bad news, of course, I mean that Democrat media is really good at doing PR for Democrats and really bad at doing actual news. And I'm super excited on this inaugural episode to be joined by my very dear friend and colleague, Elle Purnell. Here's Elle. Welcome to the show.
I'm so excited.
I'm so excited to have you. Elle and I go way back. She's amazing at so many things at the Federalist. She's our assignment editor, but she's also the media criticism queen. I want to start by getting your thoughts on something that journalist Chris Bray has covered a few times this week. And if you're not following Chris Bray, everyone should. He has an amazing Substack. He's an incredible journalist. His Substack is called Tell Me How This Ends. So if you're not following it, you should. But he is a California native. So his work, particularly on all things related to Gavin Newsom being the worst, the LA riots, the LA fires, he knows the actual scoop. And so one thing that happened this week was, in keeping with Trump's promises to restore law and order, get rid of, illegal immigration, close the border, all these things, he sent federal agents in to clear a Los Angeles park known as MacArthur Park. And I'm not a Californian, but it's my understanding that MacArthur Park is actually really beautiful and has the potential to be really beautiful. Back in the day, it was an actual awesome place. But it has since become just a complete cesspool of crime. It's rampant crime, drug abuse, homeless people everywhere, gang activity. People will like go loot stores and then sell thousands of dollars worth of stolen merchandise like at this park. It sounds like the locals just don't even go anywhere near the park. Like families and normies don't go near it because it's completely unsafe for any normal person to be near. And to the point that like businesses in the area can't even function normally because it's so out of control. And so I read about one, I think he's a deli owner who's been, this deli's been in operation for 80 some years, and he's threatening to close because the park has just made his business completely unsustainable. And so anyway, this is like, these facts are not in dispute. Like everyone knows that this park has been awful for a very long time, which is why for a very long time leading up to this raid on MacArthur Park, you saw headlines like this: MacArthur Park, LA's most dangerous neighborhood. MacArthur Park grapples with drugs and crime. The rise and fall of MacArthur Park, blah, blah, blah. Here's some more. MacArthur Park riddled with drugs and crime. Grapples with drugs and crime. I mean, like, everyone knew that this is the norm for MacArthur Park. And so Trump sent...
It's not just the crime, right? Like, locals from there will also tell you that MacArthur Park is specifically where a lot of people who are here illegally will gather, like, to get fake IDs. So it's not just a hub of crime. It's not just a hub of drugs, but it's also an illegal immigration hotspot, which is why it makes perfect sense that ICE did a raid there. But sorry, go ahead.
Yes, no, 100%. Yeah, it's not just people who are like allowed to be here, but aren't allowed to be doing, who aren't allowed to be doing crime. This is like people who are not allowed to be here and who are also engaging in rampant crime and like, peddling fake documents, whatever. Okay, great point. And so after this raid, which was really just like federal law enforcement officers enforcing the law in MacArthur Park, these were the headlines. And so you can see armed agents, heavily armed. The mayor, Karen Bass, who's a psychopath, Elle, you can tell us all about Karen Bass. She's calling it outrageous and whatever. My eyes are too bad. I can't read what's on my screen. But anyway, point being, these headlines are just painting this as like, how could anyone ever think of raiding this park or doing this show of force in this park? How, like, why would the ICE agents need to be armed, Elle? This is just like, let's all do kumbaya and ask these people to politely leave the park.
I mean, that's literally what these people on the left want. Like we saw in 2020, people arguing like, let's abolish the police and let's replace them with these unarmed social workers. And that doesn't go well. So yeah, I mean, you can't send a social worker in with, I don't know, like a no weapons to go like keep these people who are violent, dangerous, who are on drugs or what have you, from harming people. Like, this is not a park where kids are playing around and having picnics. This is like, it's a park in that it used to be a park, but it's not what you and I think of when we think of little park with a playground where people just, coexist.
Right. At this point, park is a complete misnomer. Like, it should be the MacArthur cesspool is like a way better name for what's actually going on there. Right. So it's like, I hadn't really thought of it this way, but basically Democrats, including Karen Bass, which I can put up a tweet of hers because she's just, I mean, the woman is off her rocker, but they basically want law enforcement, if they do anything, to like gentle parent criminals into like maybe sort of doing the right thing, or self-deporting or whatever. Here is a tweet from Karen Bass. Hugging the children that were cleared from the park. We will not be afraid and we will not be divided. We will stand together, all caps.
Like, going back, you mentioned this earlier a little bit, but like the outrage over the fact that these agents were armed, like they have to be armed. People are trying to kill them. Like, I think we'll talk about this probably in a few minutes, but like, there's these vigilantes around the country who are trying to murder ICE agents for doing their jobs. Yeah, if I worked for ICE, sure as heck I would want to be armed, like, to protect myself and my like fellow agents.
Yeah. And that's a great segue, actually, Elle, to our next media topic, which is these Antifa terror cells carrying out attacks on ICE and Customs and Border Protection and other federal officers who are doing, I mean, they're just doing their jobs. They literally have one job and they're doing that job, and they're being not only attacked for it, literally physically attacked by Antifa terror cells and other like radical Democrats, but they are, it's like elected Democrats essentially calling for the blood of these people. Like this isn't a bug. This is the entire point. And of course, the media contributes so much to this environment of lawlessness and violence. And here's just one example. So one of these attacks was on an ICE facility in Texas on the 4th of July. So this is Independence Day. This should be a great day of celebration for our country and for, you know, the restoration of law and order. And instead, we had a group of 10 Antifa members, or at least 10 were arrested. There may have been more than that. I don't remember that detail, but they ambushed
with attempted murder, and then there was an 11th that was charged with obstruction of justice.
Okay. So 11 people. They had a planned ambush of this ICE facility in Texas that involved some members like pulling out law enforcement by creating a diversion. Like they sprayed graffiti and were shooting off fireworks to like get the officers to come out of the complex. And then others were there with weapons ready to take out the officers who came out of the building. And so one officer was shot in the neck. He's expected to survive, I think, but like that's a serious injury. Like you're talking, you know, maybe less than an inch from taking this man's life. And this was the headline from CBS News. And of course, there were headlines like this all across the corporate media. Suspects use graffiti, firearms, body armor in 4th of July ambush outside North Texas ICE facility, officials say. No mention here of a police officer getting shot in the neck. No mention of the fact that 10 people were arrested and charged with attempted murder of law enforcement. It's so bad that like you cannot find the biggest detail, the most outrageous, egregious detail in the headline of the story. That's the entire point. You should be able to read that and know what happened.
Yeah. I mean, so I think it was yesterday. It was whatever day that like, because it happened on the 4th of July, but then stuff came out, I think, Monday night. And so like by Tuesday morning, we were like, okay, where's the media coverage of this? And I searched on the New York Times website. I searched the terms ICE ambush. And the only story that there were like two stories that I don't even know why they came up. Like by ICE, it wasn't referring to Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. The only story that came up remotely about immigration was one on like the ruthless ambition of Stephen Miller. It was like, that's not what? Like that has nothing to do with this. That's obviously, so they just didn't. And like, I think they did kind of cover it in it. They had maybe one article about what happened, but it was just the bare details. Like they didn't use the word ambush. And then they like failed to follow up as more details came out.
Yeah. And it's even worse when you contrast that with the way the media talk about any kind of right-wing violence or even not right-wing violence. Like there were so many people who were involved in
right-wing violence that they want you to believe is right-wing violence.
Yes, exactly. You might have an actual peaceful protest by right-wingers where maybe you have a few bad faith agitators that somehow get involved or not, and it's an insurrection, and it's, you know, it's all of these other like egregious things that we've never seen, this unprecedented attack on norms and decency and democracy. And then on the other side, you have elected officials agitating and like encouraging Democrats to be out for blood. And then you have these attacks and they're not even mentioned. They're hardly mentioned by the corporate media. And when they're mentioned, they are downplayed to such a degree that you don't even know the heinousness of what was committed.
Well, there's this total lack of curiosity where like, maybe they will string a few words together so that they can say, we covered it. See, here's the proof. But like the coverage exists for the purpose of downplaying it. And like the headline that you just showed on the screen a few minutes ago is a great example of that. Like they only covered it insofar as like people are now less interested in this story because of the headline.
Right. That's exactly right. Let's move on to another really just incredible. It's not even a correction because they didn't admit that they were wrong about it, but it's just classic New York Times, awful propaganda coverage of something. And then after the narrative doesn't matter anymore, now we can admit that maybe, just maybe, some of the facts Republicans were right about from the start. And so you might remember this story from before the 2024 election, when there were reports that violent Venezuelan gangs had taken over apartment complexes in Aurora, Colorado.
But just a couple.
Yeah, just a couple. A handful, as Martha Raddatz would say. Yes, just a handful. And this became a big story because there were some videos that were circulating online that other tenants of these apartment buildings had taken footage from their Ring camera or whatever, some like camera that they had outside of their apartment of armed gang members, or, even if they couldn't confirm at the time that it was gang members, later was revealed to be gang members, storming through the hallways of their apartment complexes with like large weapons, trying to find another Venezuelan tenant that they were going to like drag out and hurt. And there was so much violence. And at the time, let me just play a clip that you've probably seen before, but this is just remarkable. This is the way the corporate media talked about this story at the time.
I'm going to stop you. The incidents were limited to a handful of apartment complexes, and the mayor said our dedicated police officers have acted on those concerns. A handful of problems.
Only, Martha, do you hear yourself? Only a handful of apartment complexes in America were taken over by Venezuelan gangs, and Donald Trump is the problem and not Kamala Harris's open border. Americans are so fed up with what's going on, and they have every right to be. And I really find this exchange, Martha, sort of interesting because you seem to be more focused with nitpicking everything that Donald Trump has said rather than acknowledging that apartment complexes in the United States of America are being taken over by violent.
Amazing. Do you hear yourself, Martha? What an incredible, iconic moment. But it's because of this story being used as such a narrative. So the New York Times then, how the false story of a gang takeover in Colorado reached Trump. Because, of course, Trump talked about this at the debate before the election, and it was all like, oh, he's promoting conspiracy theories, and it talks about how this like crazy notion that gangs had taken over this apartment complex were elevated to the soon to be president of the United States, or soon to be president again of the United States. And now we have this headline from the New York Times: Democrats denied this city had a gang problem. The truth is complicated. Isn't it always complicated, Elle? Also, Democrats denied. It's like, you are the Democrats denying it, New York Times. Like, that was you. The New York Times denied that this was a problem. And now it's like, oh, no.
Seeing into this the other day, too, with tariffs and, like, how tariffs were going to affect prices. They ran this article after, like, enough months had passed to show that prices were still doing just fine. And they were like, experts predicted that tariffs were going to hike prices, and the experts all got it wrong. And how did they do that? And we were like, the experts? What do you mean the experts? Like, it was you. Like, there were like half a dozen CNN articles where the headlines were like, here's how tariffs are going to make your, everything you own more expensive. And it's like, you're talking about yourself. It's the same thing here with the New York Times.
Yes. Classic unnamed sources, or just like vaunted economists, so they can outsource who's saying it, so they can pretend they're not saying it. They do the exact same thing. Like when Biden was in office and we were barreling toward a recession. The economy was in the toilet. It was awful. And it was all like, well, we can't actually say for sure what a recession is because we don't actually have a really good definition. And so when we actually got to the fourth consecutive quarter of negative growth or whatever it is, it was like, what is a recession anyway? And then we literally got headlines that were like, why a recession is good for you actually financially. This is such a pattern. It repeats itself constantly.
It's not happening, but then also it's good that it's happening.
Yes, exactly. And we saw the same thing too, of course, with Hunter Biden's laptop, which was a huge piece of election interference because, well, Elle, actually, you were heading up the elections team at the time that this was going on. So why don't you explain how that happened?
Yeah, so the Hunter Biden laptop story. So we refer to it that way as shorthand, but like the scandal was never about Hunter Biden so much that there was information on Hunter Biden's laptop that implicated Joe Biden. And so like we call it the Hunter Biden story, and there was a lot of stuff on the laptop that reflected very poorly on Hunter Biden's character, a lot of salacious photos and videos and whatnot. But like that was never the story. The story wasn't about Hunter Biden being a terrible person and a terrible husband, though like he is demonstrably those things. It was about the foreign connections and the ways that the Biden family had made deals with foreign countries and foreign businessmen in a way that could have compromised Biden's decision making. So one of those examples would be when Joe Biden was Barack Obama's vice president. He was like the guy in charge of Ukraine relations. And he bragged at the time about getting a special prosecutor fired in Ukraine. Well, it turns out that his son, Hunter, was on the board being paid like gobs of money to be on the board of this energy company where he had no energy experience. And the special prosecutor had been looking into this energy company, and then all of a sudden, like the prosecutor went away and so did the investigation, and Joe Biden bragged about making the prosecutor go away. So things like this, people saw the Biden family business dealings that were evidenced on the laptop, and they were like, that's a major problem for the president, or at the time the guy who wanted to be president, to have that kind of baggage. So what happened is the New York Post published an article. They got the contents of the laptop because Hunter Biden like dropped it off at a laptop repair store and never picked it up. And they dropped this like incredible story about the contents of the laptop. And Twitter at the time, Facebook, all these social media companies, which later we found out were being like prodded to do so and primed to do so by the FBI, said like, this is disinformation. We're not going to let you share this, or we're going to flag it as disinformation. And all of the corporate media outlets did the same thing. Like I think it was NPR had this amazing statement, like gift from the journalism gods statement, because of how crazy it was. That was like, we're not going to waste your time by reporting on this huge story because we don't think it's true, or we don't think it's worth finding out whether it's true. And the claim was that it was Russian disinformation. The Russians had planted this laptop and the information on it. And then you had like the 51 former intelligence officials going to Politico, and I think it was Fusion Natasha Bertrand who story, saying like, we think this has all the hallmarks of Russian disinformation. Don't pay attention to it. And so there was this total media blackout of the laptop story, which came out like weeks before the 2020 election. And
specifically before that pivotal debate, the pivotal 2020 debate, like the 51 former intel officials who signed this Russian disinformation letter, like the entire point of that being written and then also dropped at the time that it was so that Biden could get up on the debate stage right before the election and wave this piece of paper around and be like, look, what he's saying is a conspiracy theory. All the intel community knows that this is fake, and like Russia, like that was the entire point right before the election.
That because we later found out that Anthony Blinken, who was part of Biden's campaign team and then later was gifted the position of Secretary of State, had gone to these people who signed on the letter and said like, hey, like I'm assembling a team, like I'm trying to get signatures to, to get people to back Biden up so that he can like waive this at the debate and, not have to answer questions about his family business deals.
Yes, exactly. And then, but in classic fashion, just like this New York Times piece, where you write this really convenient narrative that just helps your cause and helps you accrue power for Democrats, and then either as soon as it works or as soon as it doesn't work, you find out after the fact. In this case, after the 2024 election, and in the case of the Hunter Biden laptop, after the 2020 election, that actually, Republicans did have the story right, and in the case of the Hunter Biden laptop, actually, the FBI authenticated the laptop back in 2019. So actually the intel community knew full well that this was completely legitimate, that everything on the laptop was completely true and airtight, and that all of these Biden family business entanglements were completely legitimate. And so this playbook repeats itself time and time and time again. And anytime there's a story,
there's never any accountability. Like that's why you have the same guys who were behind the Russia collusion hoax in 2016 and 2017. Like they're the ones, many of them, behind the Russian disinformation Hunter Biden laptop letter in 2020. They just keep going.
Yeah. And that's how you end up with this. Yeah. Fusion Natasha, perfect example of that. Somehow she's back in the news still, constantly, all of the time. We've seen her way too many times in the past 2 weeks.
Value.
Say that again?
Oh, I just said people take what she says at face value. Like, they don't know that she's been an instrument of actual disinformation.
Yes, actual disinformation. Yes. Most people don't know, but our listeners know because they know Fusion Natasha is a complete joke. And I'm sure she'll get plenty of Pulitzer Prizes in her day because all the fake journalists get them. But you should not listen to Fusion Natasha because she is the epitome of bad news.
I'm waiting to see her made the head of the White House Correspondents Association.
Oh, yeah, that's coming. That is always the trajectory. People always fail up into that role from the biggest conspiracy theories and the worst narratives. So awesome. Thank you, Elle, so much for joining me. So pleased to have you and your vast wisdom on media criticism. This is Elle Purnell, assignment editor at The Federalist, and I'm sure we'll see her back many, many more times to come.
Thanks for having me, Kylie.
All right, before I wrap, I've got to talk about 2 clips I saw this week. The first is Lily Allen, who, if you don't know who that is, she's kind of a Hollywood has-been. She's an actress and a singer and whatever. The only reason that I think the only reason that she's like front and center right now is because she's having a split. Her marriage is breaking up with David Harbour, who's very famous right now. I mean, he's been in a number of things. You might know him from a recent Marvel movie or from Stranger Things. But anyway, their marriage is breaking up. And so he's in the news. And so, of course, she's in the news. But she has her own podcast. And on this podcast with her co-host, she was discussing her method of contraception. As she's talking about contraception, she just mentions that she used to get pregnant all the time. And because of this, she said that she has had multiple abortions. Basically, she used abortion as birth control. Like that was her contraceptive, was to just end the human life. And the real kicker is that she's had several and she couldn't even remember how many. So she guesses that it's like 4 or 5. At that point, her co-host joins in and says, she'd had about 5 abortions too, and then starts gushing about how happy she is that these 2 girlfriends could just chit chat about these things and have it all out in the open, and it was just such a happy thing for them. Really, really disgusting clip. Honestly, you might just need to see for yourself.
Abortions. I've had a few, but then again, I can't remember exactly how many.
What, really?
Yeah.
Why didn't this come up in last week's episode? We were just talking about abortions.
Because I was just letting you run with it.
Reveal everything.
I can't remember. Yeah, I think maybe like, I want to say 5, 4 or 5.
Yeah, I've had about 5 too. Lily, I'm so happy I can say that and you can say it and no one came to shoot us down.
No.
So around the same time as this Lily Allen clip, Alex Cooper releases a recent episode of Call Her Daddy podcast with actress Charlize Theron. And they discussed a lot of things in the typical Call Her Daddy way, where it was very crass and, unfiltered. But specifically, they talked about Theron's latest sexual conquests and her, what they characterized as her mature and self-aware decision to intentionally adopt 2 children into a fatherless home. So Theron is not married and she adopts 2 children and is just like single mom in it. The older of these 2 children, which surprise, surprise, this is not surprising given the fact that they have no dad, is a boy that Theron has raised as a trans girl since he was a toddler. Anyway, Theron is talking about the one-night stands that she's had and the amazing sex that she's had in this stage of her life. And she talks about this 26-year-old that she recently had sex with. And mind you, Theron is almost 50, so she's like double the age of this guy. But my colleague Elle Purnell that you saw just a few minutes ago, she phrased this the best in a piece that she wrote at The Federalist. You'll have to check it out. The 49-year-old multimillionaire and mother of 2 approaches sex with all the maturity of a beer-chugging frat boy. These 2 clips, they're totally separate shows. Lily Allen, Charlize Theron, totally separate shows, totally separate people, but they could not be more intertwined things. They're not separate things at all. Both of these things are part and parcel of the same sexual revolution. One is the cause and one is the effect. The sexual revolution, of course, sold the lie that there are no differences between the sexes, which is how you get not only trans kids, but also homes where one of the parents is completely expendable. And that sometimes manifests itself, like in Charlize Theron's case, where You don't need a dad. You can just adopt a child into a single mother home, as if children don't need a father. That biological function just doesn't exist. Or you end up with a situation where kids are adopted into a home with two moms or two dads, as if that is the natural way, or as if that honors the rights of children at all. The same culture that liberates women into having meaningless sex with random men is also the same one that pretends that there's no risks associated with that sex, that there are no consequences like getting pregnant or creating new life. And that's how you end up with a culture where a woman like Lily Allen treats abortion like birth control and can't even remember how many of her own children's lives she has ended. So if nothing else, ladies, find yourself a better role model than Charlize Theron or Lily Allen or Alex Cooper. I mean, come on. Thank you everyone so much for joining this very first episode of the Kylee Cast. I am truly so excited for everything that's in store. There's going to be so much more to come. Be sure to tune in next Thursday because I will be back with more. And don't forget, the truth hurts, but it won't kill you.